Have you ever felt like love was a language you were taught but never truly spoke? Like you were handed a script, rehearsed your lines, and stepped onto a stage where everyone else was performing too? Yet no one dared to whisper that the play was empty. From the moment you first heard a fairy tale, you were conditioned. Love was a prize, a rescue, a happily ever after etched in gold. Relationships were transactions. Be beautiful enough, agreeable enough, selfless enough, and you would be chosen. But what if the greatest lie ever sold was not about villains and heroes but about love itself? What if the very thing you were taught to crave was designed to keep you hungry? To make you believe that your worth was something to be earned rather than something you carried all along? Modern love is a hall of mirrors. You walk in, searching for something real, but all you see are reflections. Distorted, polished, impossibly perfect. Social media tells you love should look like sunsets and synchronized laughter. Rom-coms tell you persistence conquers all, that grand gestures erase years of neglect. Pop psychology whispers that if you just communicate better, if you just compromise more, if you just shrink yourself enough, you will finally be loved the way you deserve. But here is the truth they never taught you. Love was never supposed to be a cage. You were trained to believe that love meant losing yourself. That to be loved, you had to be less. Less demanding, less complicated, less you. You learned to swallow your anger, to soften your edges, to apologize for existing too loudly. You were told that love was sacrifice, but no one warned you that the greatest sacrifice would be your own soul. Carl Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And perhaps that is why we cling so desperately to the illusions of love sold to us. Because the alternative is facing the terrifying freedom of being whole on our own. We would rather twist ourselves into shapes that fit another person's emptiness than stand in the unbearable light of our own completeness. But what if love was never about finding someone to complete you? What if it was about two whole people choosing each other? Not out of lack, but out of abundance. What if the modern myths of romance were designed to keep you searching, consuming, and forever insecure? Because a heart that believes it is unworthy will always buy more, chase more, beg for more. Think of the last time you felt lonely in a relationship. Think of the times you silenced your needs to keep the peace. The moments you mistook longing for love. Think of how deeply you've been conditioned to fear being alone. As if solitude were a punishment rather than the birthplace of self-knowledge. This is the great deception. That love is something outside of you, something you must earn, something that will save you. But love, real love, begins in the unshakable knowing of your own worth. It does not ask you to abandon yourself. It does not demand your silence. It does not thrive in the shadows of your sacrifice. So let me ask you this. How much of your life have you spent trying to be lovable instead of being loved? The journey ahead is not about blaming the world for its illusions, but about waking up from them. It is about recognizing the scripts you've been handed and daring to rewrite them. It is about understanding that the love you were promised was never the love you needed. Because the love you needed was always the one you were taught to fear. The love that starts with yourself. The deception is not a single lie, but an entire ecosystem. A self-reinforcing mythology so deeply embedded in our culture that we mistake its shadows for substance. We navigate love like sleepwalkers, following paths laid out long before we were born, never questioning why we ache in the places we were promised would bring us joy. The first step toward awakening is to trace the contours of this invisible labyrinth, to feel along its walls until we recognize its shape, not as truth, but as construct. We have been raised on the myth that love is salvational, that the right person will arrive like a redeemer to lift us from our solitude and make us whole. This belief transforms relationships into silent contracts where we trade pieces of ourselves for the illusion of completion, mistaking fusion for intimacy. But love was never meant to be a crutch for the broken or a bandage for the unseen wound. It is the meeting of two sovereign beings who choose each other not out of lack, but from overflow. The tragedy is that we spend our lives searching for someone to fill our emptiness when the emptiness itself was the lie we swallowed whole. Modern love has been reduced to a consumable product. stripped of its mystery and repackaged as a series of marketable moments. Dating apps turn human connection into a game of rapid-fire judgments, where we swipe through souls as casually as scrolling through menus, evaluating potential partners with the same detached efficiency we reserve for choosing takeout. Romance is no longer a slow unfolding but a highlight reel. Instagram proposals, viral wedding dances, love measured in likes and comments. The more we commodify connection, the more we lose its essence. The raw, unpolished beauty of seeing and being seen without curation. Love cannot thrive under the glare of performance. It flourishes in the quiet, unrecorded spaces where we dare to be unimpressive. We have also been taught to confuse suffering with passion, to believe that love is supposed to hurt, that jealousy is proof of devotion and chaos is the hallmark of true feeling. Our stories are filled with lovers who destroy each other in the name of love, as if the depth of feeling could be measured by the wreckage left in its wake. But this is not love. It is addiction masquerading as destiny, a trauma bond mistaken for a soulmate. Real love does not demand your annihilation. It asks for your presence. It is not a hurricane but a steady tide. Not a fire that consumes but a light that allows you to grow. Underneath all these myths lies the unspoken terror of being alone. The fear that solitude is a sentence rather than a sanctuary. We cling to hollow relationships, mistaking the comfort of familiarity for the pulse of genuine connection. Because the alternative is to face the vast and terrifying freedom of our own company. But solitude is not the enemy of love. It is its prerequisite. Until you can sit with yourself, not as a half-person waiting to be completed, but as a whole being capable of wholeness, you will always be searching for love in the wrong places, mistaking the reflection of your own hunger for the face of another. And perhaps the most insidious illusion of all is the belief that love can be controlled, that if we follow the right steps, master the right techniques, or decode the right signals, we can guarantee its arrival and permanence. We treat love like a puzzle to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived, forgetting that its very nature is wild and untamable. The moment we try to dictate its terms, we suffocate it. Love demands surrender, not to another person, but to the understanding that we are never fully in charge of its comings and goings. It is not a contract to be negotiated, but a gift to be received. Not a problem to be fixed, but a presence to be honored. These are not abstract ideas, but the silent currents shaping every relationship you've ever had. The invisible scripts you've been handed without your consent. To love differently, we must first see the machinery of the illusion. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Only then can we begin to dismantle it, brick by brick, until what remains is not what we were told love should be, but what we know, in our deepest selves, it truly is. There is an old tale about a kingdom where mirrors were forbidden, where citizens from birth were taught to see themselves only through the eyes of others. They became experts in reading approval or disapproval in the glances of their neighbors, shaping themselves to fit the unspoken rules of worthiness. In this kingdom, love was traded like currency. You earned it by being what others wanted you to be. The tragedy was not the law itself, but how thoroughly the people forgot there had ever been another way to live. One day, a child found a shard of a broken mirror and saw her own face for the first time. At first, she trembled at the strangeness of it, this autonomous existence separate from anyone's perception. But then she began to recognize something deeper than reflection, a presence that needed no external validation to simply be. The elders called this dangerous vanity, but it was the first real truth she had ever known. This is the silent mythology we inhabit when it comes to love. We have been taught to see ourselves and each other through distorted lenses, measuring worth by our ability to conform to invisible standards. The most powerful deceptions are not those that hide reality, but those that become reality, shaping our instincts before we can question their origins. Consider how many love stories begin with transformation. The ugly duckling becoming beautiful, the beast turning into a prince, as if love's highest purpose were to erase what was there before. We absorb these narratives like oxygen, never noticing how they teach us that love is conditional, that we must become something other than ourselves to deserve it. There is another story about a village built atop a frozen lake. For generations, the people lived comfortably on the ice, building homes and trading goods, convinced the solid surface was all there was. They developed elaborate explanations for the strange cracks and groans beneath their feet. Call them fate, call them tests of faith. Only when someone finally dared to chip through did they discover the vibrant ecosystem thriving below. The world of liquid depth they had been walking over their entire lives. Modern love is this village. We have built entire philosophies on the frozen surface of transactions and conditions, terrified of what might happen if we allowed real depth to melt through. The irony is that we fear drowning when we are already suffocating on the ice. The most pervasive myth may be that of the missing piece, the idea that we are puzzles to be solved by another's presence. This narrative turns love into a scavenger hunt where we spend our lives searching for someone who can fill our gaps, never realizing that wholeness was never meant to be found in another. There is a profound difference between two broken pieces fitting together out of desperation and two complete beings choosing each other from abundance. The ancient alchemists understood this when they spoke of the conjunction, not the merging that erases, but the union that magnifies. Real love does not complete you. It meets you in your completeness and says yes to all that you already are. These stories live in our bones, shaping how we love without our conscious consent. To free ourselves, we must become archaeologists of our own hearts, excavating the buried myths that dictate our relationships. The work is not to replace one story with another, but to wake up from storytelling altogether, to stand naked before the truth that love was never supposed to be a performance, a negotiation, or a salvation. It is the quiet recognition that you were never broken, that no amount of external validation can substitute for the radical act of self-meeting, that the most revolutionary love begins when you stop looking for mirrors and become your own light. The realization that we've been living inside an artificial construct of love is both liberating and terrifying. Like waking up to find the walls of your home were made of paper all along. Now comes the delicate work of applying this awareness to the living, breathing reality of your relationships, beginning with the most important one, your relationship with yourself. This is where philosophy meets practice, where lofty ideas descend into the messy, beautiful work of daily reinvention. Start by observing your own patterns without judgment, like an anthropologist studying a fascinating culture. Notice when you reflexively shrink your truth to keep the peace, or when you mistake longing for love, or when you feel that old familiar ache of believing you must earn what was always yours by right of existence. These moments are not failures but sacred data points, showing you where the old programming still runs beneath the surface of your awareness. The revolution happens in small, defiant acts of presence, saying this is me when every conditioned instinct screams to perform, to please, to contort. It looks like catching yourself mid-sentence as you start to say what you think someone wants to hear, then gently correcting course toward your authentic truth. It feels like the electric discomfort of allowing silence rather than filling it with platitudes, of sitting with someone's disappointment when you choose yourself, of learning to distinguish between compromise, which is sometimes necessary, and self-betrayal, which never is. These are the muscles that atrophy under the weight of societal conditioning, and like any atrophied muscle, they protest when you first begin to use them again. The ache is not a sign you're doing it wrong, but proof you're doing it right. In practical terms, this means rewriting the unspoken contracts that govern your relationships. Where once you might have thought, I will be loved if I make myself indispensable, try whispering instead, I am loved when I am most fully myself. Where before you measured a relationship's health by its absence of conflict, begin to measure it by the safety you feel in expressing your full spectrum of emotions. Practice the radical art of showing up without agenda, not to convince, not to secure, not to control, but simply to discover what emerges when you stop performing and start being. This shift changes everything, from how you text someone you're interested in, no more calculating response times, to how you navigate disagreements, no more swallowing your truth to maintain artificial harmony. The implications ripple outward into every corner of your life. You'll begin to spot the cultural machinery everywhere. In movies that still frame persistence as romantic rather than predatory. In songs that glorify unhealthy obsession as passion. In well-meaning friends who ask why you're still single with pity in their voices. This awareness isn't meant to make you cynical, but to set you free. Free to define love on your own terms. Free to walk away from what diminishes you without needing to justify your choice. Free to stay in relationships not out of fear, but because they genuinely align with your truth. Most importantly, free to rebuild your understanding of love from the ground up, not as something you chase or earn, but as the natural consequence of showing up authentically in the world and allowing others to do the same. Conclusion and transformational core. The love that remains when the fairy tale fades. What remains when we strip away the illusions? Not some cold, clinical alternative to love, but its purer, more vibrant essence. The kind of connection that doesn't need to be propped up by fantasy or fear. This is the love that surprises you with its quiet strength. The love that feels like coming home to a place you didn't know you belonged. It doesn't promise to complete you because it recognizes you were never incomplete. It doesn't swear eternal certainty because it understands that real intimacy is a daily choice, not a magical guarantee. It knows that the deepest bonds are forged not through grand gestures but through countless ordinary moments of showing up, for yourself first, and then for another. The call now is not to perfect this overnight, but to begin, to catch yourself in those automatic behaviors and gently course correct, to tolerate the discomfort of setting new boundaries, to celebrate the small victories when you choose authenticity over approval. This is how we thaw the frozen lake, not with dramatic explosions, but with the persistent warmth of our own awakened attention. Each time you resist the old programming, you weaken its hold. Each time you honor your truth despite the fear, you rewrite the story. So start where you are. The next time you feel that ancient urge to mold yourself into what you think someone wants, pause, breathe, ask instead, what would it look like to show up as myself? The answers may surprise you. The path won't be linear. There will be days the old myths whisper persuasively in your ear. Days when the safety of the cage feels preferable to the vulnerability of freedom. But with each conscious choice, you'll find yourself standing a little taller, loving a little truer, until one day you realize the greatest love story was never the one you were sold. It's the one you've been writing all along, word by courageous word, in the quiet language of your own unshackled heart.